everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Trust Agenda, a framework for advancing public trust in higher education. My name is Scout Meredith Best, and I am the program coordinator for the Advancing Public Trust in Higher Education initiative at the American Association of Colleges and Universities. Last month, AAC&U released the Trust Agenda, a framework for advancing public trust in higher education, a new report designed to help colleges and universities respond proactively at a moment when institutions face a crisis of trust, attacks from the current administration, and budget cuts. Thank you for joining me and my report co-authors for a discussion of the report's recommendations on how higher education can strengthen trustworthiness, accelerate innovation, safeguard institutional autonomy, and deepen relationships with students and communities. If you would like to learn more about the APT initiative and read the full report, please click the link that we're going to share in the chat. We also maintain an active Substack blog, and feel free to subscribe also via clicking the link in the chat. This webinar is sponsored by Alt Liberal Arts. Alt Liberal Arts is a global education initiative concerned with the freedom to learn, civic engagement, and advancement of liberal arts. In collaboration with Bard College and the Global Higher Education Alliance for the 21st Century, Alt Liberal Arts offers free global online lectures and courses for which you can register at altliberalarts.org. These lectures would not be possible without the support from the Open Society Foundation and Bard College. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen where you can enter your questions and comments throughout this online seminar, and I look forward to discussing as many questions as time allows. Now I'm pleased to introduce my colleagues and report co-authors. Kathryn Enke is the Vice President for Leadership and Strategy at the American Association of Colleges and Universities. In this role, she oversees AAC&U's leadership development programs and co-leads AAC&U's initiative to advance public trust in higher education. Prior to joining AAC&U, Kathryn served for over a decade as the Chief of Staff at the College of St. Benedict, a residential liberal arts college for women. She earned a BA in History from the College of St. Benedict and an MA and PhD in Educational Policy and Administration from the University of Minnesota's in Twin Cities. Jeremy C. Young is the Senior Advisor for Strategic Initiatives at the American Association of Colleges and Universities. He serves as a co-director for AAC&U's Advancing Public Trust in Higher Education initiative and is the lead author of AAC&U's report, The Trust Agenda, published this June in 2026. Jeremy was previously the Director of State and Higher Education Policy at Penn America and has taught at Utah Tech University, Grand Valley State University, Indiana University, and Indiana University. He serves on the board of the Partnership to Advance Transformation in Higher Ed, and is the author of The Age of Charisma, Leaders, Followers, and Emotions in American Society, 1870 to 1940, and is the co-author of 3 of America's Censored Classroom Reports at Penn America. Felicia Full-Love is the Associate Director in the Office of Leadership and Strategy at the American Association of Colleges and Universities. In this role, she works to address public trust in higher education. And prior to joining AAC&U, Felicia worked in science policy, serving in roles at the Department of State, the American Chemical Society, and the National Science Foundation. Felicia holds a doctorate in organic chemistry from Emory University and a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Butler University. I'm really pleased to jump in with our first question. And as institutions face funding cuts, political pressure, and public skepticism all at once, why does public trust in higher education specifically matter when institutions are fighting battles on so many of these fronts? And I'll ask Jeremy to kick us off with a response.
Thanks, Scout, and thanks to the Alt Liberal Arts team for having us here. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you. I would say that the thing that was the most disheartening for me as a longtime advocate for higher education against these kinds of restrictions over the last 18 months has not been so much what the government has done to higher education institutions and more the lack of response from the public, the lack of concern. I think of higher education as a community asset, as a sector that brings value to any community that it's in, whether or not you are a college student or you have a family member who's a college student. You should be able to find some value from the benefits that higher education brings to your community. And when you think about another community asset of that type, like the fire department, for instance, if the administration had done to local fire departments what it has done to local colleges and universities, there would be a protest in every city in the country because Americans understand that the fire department is a community institution that serves their community, whether or not they ever have a fire. They see the value in it, and we need higher education to be in that same position. We need to have some leverage against the kinds of threats and challenges we're seeing for higher education because we need the public to be on our side. And right now, they're not. It's not that the public hates higher education. It's not that they necessarily agree with what the administration is doing. It's not a high salience issue for them. They don't see it as a key concern. There's very little evidence that the public gets really mad when awful things are done to higher education. And if we want to turn that around, if we want to change those numbers, we have to win the battle of public trust.
Thanks, Jeremy. Felicia or Catherine, any initial thoughts on why public trust in higher education matters in this moment?
I think so many of the other challenges that institutions are facing have their roots in the decline of the social academic contract that colleges have had with their communities. So, as we talk about things like changes to student aid, the root of that problem is disinvestment because suddenly colleges are not seen as having a public good or a social good. If we look at decreased enrollment, students are not choosing to go to college because they're no longer convinced. They're skeptical whether college will actually have the kind of outcomes that we've promised for them. So even as we're distracted by all of these battles on many fronts, I think many of them have their root in this social contract that is no longer so compelling and is no longer helping us keep the trust of the general public overall.
Yeah, and I'll just add to Catherine's point, I think as a sector, we have to be honest that times have changed, right? And that we have to think about how we can be more agile to meet the needs of today's public. And so whether we need to reevaluate whether or not we are meeting the needs of the public and how we can do that better. So I'll stop there because I don't want to get into the recommendations. I'll leave that for my colleagues.
Yeah, and speaking of needing the needs of the public, even as those needs are changing, for those who are just joining us or newer to this work, I was wondering if we could share a little bit about both the Advancing Public Trust Initiative and our newly released report, the Trust Agenda, which just came out in June.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. So, this started for AAC&U over a year ago with in April of 2025, AAC&U and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences convened a group of almost 200 college, university, and scholarly society presidents to ask them what they wanted to do or what support they needed around the challenges that were coming from the administration. And the strong sentiment that grew out of those meetings was the urgent need for a collective statement. And so AAC&U coordinated something called the Call for Constructive Engagement, which was released in April 2025, which was signed by over 650 college, university, and scholarly society presidents. Over 10% of all college presidents in the country signed this document. It's the broadest sign-on statement that we have seen in the last probably 5 years on these issues. And in the aftermath of that statement, we were interested in how we could sustain the momentum from it and build it into something that wasn't just a one-day story or a one-week story, but that was more enduring and could really benefit presidents and campuses. And our conclusion was that we needed to focus on public trust and do an initiative around building public trust, particularly focused on what campus leaders, our members, can do on their own campuses to advance public trust in higher education. So the APT initiative, as we call it, the Advancing Public Trust in Higher Education initiative, was launched in September, and then over the last 9 months, have been, really trying very quickly to put together a sense of what is really going to help. What are recommendations we can offer to campus leaders that are actionable, that are practical, that are politically and financially feasible, and that will actually work to move the needle on public trust. So we did a lot of reading. We talked to a lot of experts. We traveled the country, workshopping ideas with practitioners on the ground. And last month, we released the Trust Agenda, a framework for advancing public trust in higher education, which is our report on public trust that lays out what ended up being 5 recommendations around advancing public trust, things that campus leaders can do. The 5 recommendations we had 3 of them that were focused on internal reform efforts for higher education. The first of those is accelerate innovation. Campuses, we argue, need to be able to demonstrate to the public that they can fix their own mistakes, solve their own problems, adapt to the needs of the 21st century, and that they can do it quickly and nimbly, which is something that has been very difficult for higher education historically. We have a recommendation around prioritizing community engagement, which, there's a lot of institutions that have focused on community engagement over the past 40, 50 years, but our argument is that it needs to be universal in a way that it hasn't been, and it needs to be embedded uh, in the sort of the DNA of a campus, not just siloed in an office, but part of classroom instruction, part of student affairs, part of every aspect of the campus. And we come with a couple of these recommendations because we are drawing them out of the experiences of campuses that are already being successful in building public trust. So we profile Community College, Bunker Hill Community College at the beginning of the report. We talk a lot about, why are community colleges and regional public institutions much more popular than private institutions and especially than Ivy League institutions. There are polls that indicate that that's the case. And our conclusion is because they're community engaged, because they're nimble, and because, of our third recommendation, which is to recommit to inclusive excellence. They are student-centered campuses. Everything they do is about serving students. It's clear to the public what their mission is and what they're trying to accomplish. Our fourth recommendation is about better communication. A lot of people have said that this is a PR problem, and we see it as not solely a PR problem, but we do think PR can help. So we give some guidance around tying the value of higher education as an engine of social mobility, as a driver of economic opportunity, as a creator of life-saving research, and tying those ideas to broadly held common values like freedom, fairness, opportunity, and security. Our final recommendation, which I think is unusual for a report on public trust, is coordinating a mutually a mission-centered defense of higher education. And our argument here is that the public is not going to trust an institution that it can't trust to defend itself. So we argue for a focus on university autonomy, for collaboration across institutions and within institutions to defend higher education. So those are our 5 recommendations, and we think that they need to be taken as a package of 5. They need to be all of them done all at once by campuses in order to be effective. But we do think that taking those recommendations together will lead to some meaningful improvements for higher education institutions.
Yeah, so thinking about building on those recommendations, the report's very clear on laying out the strategies that will allow us to build trust between institutions and their communities. So with that in mind, I'm wondering if you all could share a little bit more about how APT is planning to engage administrators, faculty, students on campuses to advance public trust, so the internal stakeholders. And then more broadly, how can higher ed leaders position their institutions to respond to attacks and proactively meet the moment in this context of a political and social environment that is just constantly changing? Kathryn, I'll pass it over to you to start.
So you know that our team has talked a lot about this false choice between defensive resistance and passive accommodation. And I think the most important thing that leaders can do is reject that choice. We're calling for something different with these 5 recommendations in the trust agenda. We're calling for proactive trustworthiness. Trust is an outcome. It has to be earned through consistent actions of trustworthiness. And this trustworthiness creates the foundation for weathering the political storms and the constantly changing social environment that you've referenced. And that's how we, as representatives of colleges and universities, meet this moment, by opening our doors wider and by doing our work better, not by hunkering down in our defensive position. I think that can be really hard when it feels like colleges and universities are fighting battles on all fronts. And so APT is making the commitment here that campuses will not have to undertake these challenges alone. Our report was designed to start the conversation rather than finish it. And that's really intentional, because what works at a community college in Massachusetts will look different than what works at a research university in Arizona. And our job, our role, is to provide scaffolding for institutions while they work to determine what makes sense in their specific context. So let me give you some examples of what that scaffolding from the APT team will look like. First, AAC&U will partner directly with campus and civil society leaders to implement the recommendations of the trust agenda throughout the sector. This is really a collaborative approach, and we're working to build a community of practice where institutions can learn from each other's successes and each other's challenges. We're working to coordinate a cross-sector coalition that will seek to improve public trust in higher education. That coalition promotes a shared understanding of the drivers in public trust in higher education. It enables meaningful collaboration within and beyond the higher education sector. It deepens community and student engagement, and it encourages institutional innovation in developing and implementing trustworthy practices. Coalition members already include leaders in higher education organizations, advocacy group, business, civil society organizations, and experts in public trust in higher education. Second, APT is developing practical tools and resources that can be used both at the campus level and nationally. The report offers these 5 practical, effective, and politically feasible recommendations, but we need to help administrators, faculty, and students on campuses to adapt them. And toward that end, we're offering a 6-month team-based APT Leadership Institute that will engage leaders and educators at a diverse range of campuses in active work toward the recommendations in the trust agenda. This Leadership Institute fosters collaboration across the higher education ecosystem, and it's really practically aimed to make the value of college real for everyone, even for those who may not attend. So registration will open for that program next month. We're really excited to engage teams in the real work of the trust agenda. Third, we're committing to a long game here. This isn't a quick fix. It's not a PR campaign. It's about a steadfast commitment to higher education institutions bettering themselves over time. And I think the Substack APT Words is really important to share ongoing ideas and ongoing conversation about how to address declining public trust, even as things constantly shift and change, and as we have new ideas for implementing the trust agenda's recommendations. Finally, we're also working on metrics to measure our progress. AAC&U is uniquely positioned to do this. We have already led the way to articulate essential learning outcomes. We developed value rubrics to authentically assess student work toward those outcomes. And we're eager to develop additional tools to assess the state of public trust that will yield evidence that community colleges and liberal arts colleges, research universities, and minority serving institutions can confidently share with each other and with the public to show our progress in this area. I think the bottom line here is that we're providing all sorts of frameworks and tools and peer learning opportunities and sustained support, even as we know the real work of building public trust has to happen on individual campuses, in individual communities, with individual students. So we're really excited about the plans we have to help leaders at colleges and universities seize this moment.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for sharing more. Felicia or Jeremy, any additional thoughts, Felicia, particularly surrounding the coalition work?
I think Kathryn summed up kind of everything that we're hoping to do very well. And the one thing I will mention here is that we are being very intentional in thinking about how we address this problem and understanding that the report is the beginning, but the real work starts as we start to engage with campuses. And also recognizing that higher ed cannot have this conversation alone. We cannot work on this problem if we do not go out and think about who do we need to build coalitions with, including the public, right? How do we engage with the public in a meaningful way? I think those are things, those are hard questions to deal with, right? As a sector, we tend to be very internal, where we look at ourselves, we talk to each other, we go to conferences, right? Everything's very academic. But in order to address this issue, which is more of a social innovation issue here, we have to think about how do we bring others along on this journey. And so I foresee the next several years being a learning experience for higher ed as a sector, as well as a way to build kind of a better coalition and a stronger coalition around the sector and public trust.
Yeah, and terrific segue into my next question. Speaking of how we can best engage the public in a meaningful way, one thing that I think that we absolutely can't forget about is the fact that most Americans haven't actually experienced higher ed firsthand, right? This is a country where just over 35% of people hold a bachelor's degree, and we can expand that a little bit more to any sort of post-secondary credential to get us right around the 45% mark. That's still not a majority. So, with that in mind, how should we engage with the majority of the public who has such little experience or contact with higher ed? And given this very high barrier to entry that engaging with higher ed has, what purpose does defending higher ed actually serve for the public's interest?
Yeah, that's a really important question, Scout. And I want to go back and think about something that Jeremy stated at the beginning about when all of the attacks on higher ed started, the surprise was that the public did not come to our defense. Um, and I don't know if that's really a surprise. I think about that in my own case of a person who was a public servant. I was a federal employee, and when all of the attacks started happening on federal service, the public also did not come to our defense. And so there were a lot of conversations about, well, why, like you should care about what public servants do. You should care about what higher ed does. But it is on us as higher ed to make that case, right? It is our responsibility to open the doors and to be in community with the community and show our value, right? I think we always kind of say that cliche thing of like the economic value of having a degree, that you're going to make X amount of dollars more if you go to college or if you don't go to college. And that's true, right? The data all shows that those things are very true. But we also have to make the case that even if you never step on a college campus, there is benefit for the existence of higher ed. That there are aspects of your life that while you may not have stepped on a college campus, that because someone in your life did, or someone that your doctor did, or your dentist did, or the person that developed your car, because they stepped in, because they were a part of higher ed, we have these things. Your life has increased in terms of your ability to live longer, and increased in terms of your ease of being able to have transportation, like all of these very kind of things that I think we take for granted in our daily lives. Many of them have been touched by someone who stood and studied on a college campus. And so it is to the benefit of us as a collective for colleges and universities to exist, and for them to have the ability and the freedom to study and understand all of these kind of or complex issues. And so I think the thing that we really have to encourage leaders to do, or to encourage them to really think about, what does it mean to be in community? What does it mean to be a part of a community? What does it mean to meet the community where they are? One of the things I think we should think about is like listening sessions, right? Do we need to go to the local library? Where do the people exist? And even if you're at an institution that has a national profile, you should still be thinking about, where are my communities across this country or across this globe, and am I thinking about how I can solve problems for those communities? Am I helping those communities solve whatever their issues are? How am I being a part of the solution and not a barrier? And so I think, yes, while the number of people who may attend college is 35%, every person in this country has been impacted by higher ed. And we have to make the case for the public on why it matters and why our defense of the sector is very important.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Felicia. And I want to just illustrate what you're saying with two quick stories that we uncovered in our research for this report. The first was a story about a biology, plant biology professor at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign in 1970, who was working with his students on some corn stalks in a farm that by the side of the highway that he typically took his students to examine the corn, and he noticed a disease on the corn, and he and his students identified this as the southern cornleaf blight, which by the end of the growing season had killed 60% of all of the corn in the United States. So for a lot of Midwestern economies, I mean, this is absolutely devastating. And he worked with a team of researchers, and within a single growing season, was able to come up with a way to defeat the blight. And in 1971, the crop came back, and the economies of those states came back. So just a tremendous story that was still being cited decades later in some states where we looked, as evidence of how higher ed can partner with communities to do something that makes a real difference for them. The other story came out of Kathryn Kramer's excellent book, The Politics of Resentment, where she interviewed a number of rural conservative Wisconsinites, largely in 2007, so before there were any major national or state politicians uh, raising criticisms of higher education. Even Scott Walker was a couple of years away in Wisconsin. And she asked them about what they thought of the University of Wisconsin, and they had pretty negative responses, and their responses were a little different from the responses that you hear today after the issue has become so politicized. There's a great story in this book about a guy who says, "Well, I went up to this fishing hole in this remote lake where I've been fishing all my life with everyone I grew up with." And I go up there, and there's this researcher from the University of Wisconsin with a bunch of heavy equipment and traps in the lake, and I ask him what he's doing, and he says, "I'm trying to determine whether bass spawn in the same place every year." And the guy says, I just looked at him and said, did you ask anyone who lives here? Did you ask, we can tell you the answer. Bass do spawn in the same place every year, but you didn't ask. You didn't ask anyone in the community. And he says to Kathryn Kramer, they just don't care about us. They don't want anything to do with us, higher education. And the contrast between those two stories is very instructive, right? These are in both cases people who are not having a lot of contact with higher education institutions. And the contact that they are having, I mean, first of all, ask people before you do research on their lake, what they're doing. But there's a deeper story here, which is that higher education has to see the community as partners. They have to build intentional long-term relationships. And really meet the needs that the community is sharing rather than simply extracting from that community. That's the secret to public trust in higher education. And you can see it right there in those stories.
I'll jump in with a follow-up on that, Jeremy. Thinking about institutions that draw from a large national pool of applicants, obviously regional publics are doing this work incredibly well. Community colleges are doing this work pretty incredibly well. But the institutions still making the news are the Harvards and the Yales of the world. And they draw from communities across the globe. So when we're talking about community engagement and outreach and building strong relationships, what does that look like?
Well, that's a really good question. And, as I think you identified to the team initially, Scout, Mara Casey Teakin has a great book on this, where she interviewed a bunch of first generation students who attended Ivy League institutions, and found that they really had this overwhelming feeling of alienation and aloneness on campus, that even with all of the efforts to create belonging and community on campus that institutions are promoting, these students from rural areas in particular just didn't feel supported. They felt that they had to sort of conform to a different culture that was not natural to them, and their success in higher education would be dependent on that. And then they also felt that that students that when they graduated, there was no path home for them, right? They were trained in in many cases funneled toward sort of jobs in big business or corporate finance, and place in big population centers, and no real skills that they could bring home to their local communities or support their communities, even if they weren't returning home. So there is a huge problem for elite higher education institutions around this, and a lot of it does have to do with the fact that they are in the community but not of the community. They do not draw on a student population that is primarily focused on their communities. So we profile a couple of institutions in the report, like Hollins University, that do make an effort to invest in their local communities and to draw local students and provide them with scholarship support. Even that is only part of the story, because the real story here is that if you are drawing applicants from a national pool, your community is not just your physical community where you're located. It is the communities that your students call home. And so there has to be a way for campuses to help their students build relationships, build support, build connections, not in just in Cambridge if you're Harvard, but in the place that you actually grew up, and to bring those benefits to that community. So that's a key part of the story. And it's also true that the public, as you said, not only talks ad nauseum about these institutions, but they also are the least popular institutions, according to the polling. And I have heard a number of stories of people, working at public institutions in red states, saying that they're being criticized by community members for things that they're hearing about on TikTok or on Fox News, that are happening at Harvard, that are happening at Yale, that are not happening at that institution. And it doesn't matter how many times they explain that, people still see higher education as what they see on the news. So we have to be able to tell different stories, but we also have to be able to do different things.
Can't see the audience, but I imagine we're talking to an audience that has worked closely in colleges and universities. And I think all of them then are probably aware of the competitive enrollment environment that colleges and universities face. And we've spent a lot of time then as leaders, as educators, trying to differentiate our college from other colleges. And so that the language is always around rankings and how come we're better at our one place than everybody else that's offering a similar educational experience across the country. What I love about this project is, number one, it flips those rankings, all of those rankings on their head, right? The places that have been considered the least well-resourced, the least perhaps well-ranked, the least nationally known, are doing the best job in engendering trust in their local communities. So as a sector, we have an opportunity then to learn from the places whose stories have been undertold overall. I also I love that this calls all of us to defend each other in a new way. So no longer is it sufficient for me to explain why XYZ University is better than our competitor down the road. Suddenly, we're having to make a much larger case about why college is valuable, whether you attend my institution or our competitor down the road, or a completely different place that offers a different kind of experience. We need the whole network of colleges and universities to sort of be singing from the same hymnal about why no matter where you go to college, no matter who's doing research that impacts your community, it is valuable overall.
And I'll just to add to what you said, Kathryn, it is definitely true that a number of elite private institutions are doing great things in community engagement. For instance, the most long-standing and well-resourced and effective community engagement center on a campus in the country is at University of Pennsylvania, the Netter Center for Community Partnerships. But if you ask, a random faculty member at the University of Pennsylvania, what is the mission of the university? They're unlikely to say community partnerships. Whereas if you ask a faculty member at a community college that question, they will all say community support, student support. That's the key, right? It's about not just siloing this in an office, not just investing resources in it, but making it part of the DNA of the campus.
Yeah, excellent. And speaking about getting folks both in and out of higher ed engaged, what advice do you all have for engaging alumni, former staffers of institutions, others within the institution who care about this work? What does that process look like? Because we can't just depend on the public. Building trust starts at home, as it were.
Yeah, I'll start. And we had an interesting conversation while we were developing the report with an organization that worked with business leaders. And one of the comments that they gave us was around how universities call on alumni when they want money. Right. That's when they tap into their alumni network. They're like, we need to raise funds, so let's tap into our alumni network. And what would it mean if you tapped in your alumni network not to ask for funds, but to ask for stories of how that institution has changed your life or the impact that attending higher college in general has played on the trajectory for your career? And that was an interesting aspect because I'm thinking about I went to college. I went to two different institutions and they always reach out to me when they want to raise funds, but it's rarely for other things. And so really thinking about how do we leverage alumni, not just to ask for money, but to also ask for them to be advocates and to really give them the tools to be advocates for higher ed and demonstrate that their voices are actually some of the most important voices because they have the experience. They know firsthand what it's like to live on that, to be on that campus, to live on that campus, whether they had a positive or a negative experience. I think it's important to ask people to talk about what their college experience was like, because it's an opportunity for the current leaders to learn of how do we change, how do we improve, how do we make a better case for prospective students and families. So that's one way I think that we can engage alumni, as well as the business sector. I think we need to think about local businesses that are connecting to our campuses that provide campus services. How do we better connect to them? How do we align kind of how are we aligning for their mission? How are they speaking on our behalf to our legislators and to other folks? So just being able to build those connections and build those relationships and realize that sometimes the ask is not financial, but the ask is to be a voice and to be an advocate.
One of the most alarming findings for me as we were preparing this report was in public opinion polls about higher education that showed that many young people, prospective, current students, recent graduates, people who did have experiences in college were highly critical of colleges and universities. And Jeremy talked early on about our recommendation related to inclusive excellence. And that recommendation is really about helping all students succeed in college, in their careers and their lives, regardless of their identities and backgrounds, because it's at the center of our mission. but also acknowledging that those graduates become one of our most important resources in telling the authentic story of why colleges and universities were valuable in their lives. So every student's success is a story that is compelling toward public trust. Every time we let a student down for any number of reasons is another example that shows why higher education was not valuable in that instance. And so thinking about student success that way is really a call toward inclusive excellence and serving those who have been historically least welcome, least supported in higher education spaces. Sorry, Jeremy, I stepped on your response.
No, that's perfect. And I completely agree. And look, the last thing I'll say on this is just to think a little bit about the way this works from a for someone who, as you know, at least half of Americans don't hold a college degree, don't certainly not a four-year college degree. Two-thirds of Americans don't hold a four-year degree. Um, what can they do? Well, here's what I would say. First of all, just be open to communication, be open to partnership with higher education institutions, and also hold us accountable when we don't make those partnership offers in good faith, when we extract and exploit rather than partnering and supporting and providing value. Let us know when we are not when we're being the researcher, the bass fishing researcher, and not the corn blade researcher. This is we we owe something. We have an obligation as a public institution. Even private colleges are public institutions in a sense. We have an obligation to the public to provide value and to invest in our communities. If we want to be viewed as a community asset, we have to be a community asset. One of the things that we came up with in our research was the difference um, between trust and trustworthiness. Too many people assume trust means just trust us, but we came to feel that trust was required evidence, that it required a long period of demonstration that trust was necessary and valuable, promises made, promises kept. And so, I think our message to the public, among other things, is just, hold our feet to the fire, uh, make partnerships with us, make promises, let us make promises, but make sure we keep them.
On that note, I would like to invite our audience to drop questions into the Q&A function or into the chat for our team to answer. And the first question that we have is around reward structures and systems for faculty. And what implication that has on public opinion.
Right. This is a great question. We this is generally talked about in the literature now as being about incentive structures. This is the new buzzy thing when you're talking about systems analysis. So, and it's completely right. The truth is that faculty at elite private institutions, elite research institutions, public or private, are incentivized to focus primarily on research, which, depending on the field, can be about getting grants or it can be about producing scholarship or books, but research as the focus with teaching and service as lesser. Now that is a small minority of schools. The majority of schools, the focus is the opposite. It's on teaching in particular, with some focus on service and less on research. These are community colleges, regional public institutions. What we don't see a lot of is incentives for faculty to be community engaged, to engage, even if there's a service expectation, it can just be sit on a couple of faculty committees. It doesn't necessarily mean integrate community partnership strategies into your teaching. And so I think we need to see these institutions have very different missions, but they all have the same underlying value, which is the purpose of higher education is to open the minds of students and provide an education that is going to benefit them both as people and as professionals. And we have to prioritize that in our incentive structures, in tenure, promotion, evaluation strategies, just as we do in the report and in other aspects of what we do.
And I think we can use those incentives across those traditional categories of faculty engagement. So what does community engaged research look like, for example, right? It's the example you used about corn blight rather than the example you used about bass fishing. What does community engaged teaching look like? What does community engaged service look like? That can be, no matter whether your mission focuses more on one or the other, community engagement can be present in all of those activities that are happening for faculty.
I think the one thing I would add to this is that we cannot allow this responsibility of community engagement to fall on the contingent faculty. And I think that is the issue is that those that are the most at risk of losing their jobs are usually the ones that are placed in the position to do that outreach work, as many institutions will call it. And somehow we have to flip that on its head, and we have to say that it is the responsibility of everyone, including that tenured professor that has all of the funding to be engaged in the community, not just your contingent faculty or your adjuncts to do that work. That I think requires institutions to really think about how they are supporting their faculty, how they're supporting their students, what are the support systems that they have for faculty. We talk a lot about wraparound support for students, but also what do those support systems look like for faculty? How do we ensure that we engage faculty in a way that they feel that they have the things that they need in order to be successful? And that there's not gatekeeping happening in order for them to be successful. So I think, this is why I think that the Leadership Institute will be something really important, because I'm believing that we may investigate a lot of these kind of issues of how do we rethink higher ed. I think one of the things we've learned over the past 9 months is that, the status quo is not going to be enough. We have to really rethink how we do a lot of these things now.
And
To
I'll just
extend that a little bit too, I feel like we put a lot on the backs of faculty. We work faculty really hard, and every single staff person is a voice for the institution. Whether I am a dining services worker, a residence assistant, a faculty member, the president of the institution. When I go to the grocery store and have an interaction with my checkout person, I might be the only interaction they're having that can represent colleges and universities on that particular day. And so it's not just the reward system for faculty, but the reward system and the experience that all of those individuals are having and the ways that they represent the educational mission in the local community. I think we underestimate the frontline workers and the important role they have in representing in the community the value of colleges and universities.
I'll just add that the a number of the recommendations we have in this report are not new ideas, right? Community engagement is not a new idea. Students focus, inclusive excellence, these are not new ideas. The idea that colleges need to be more nimble and embrace change more, not a new idea. What is distinct, I think, about our framing of them is that we are saying that failing to do these things is having tangible consequences for higher education institutions. They are becoming less popular, they are hemorrhaging public support, and it is because they are not doing these things that we really have known they need to do for a long time. So that I think is the unique, the special sauce, if you will, of this report and of these recommendations is saying these are good things to do, but they're not just good things to do. They're now essential things to do because they are the way that we build public trust.
Do we have a question on how high impact pedagogical practices might advance community trust? What does that look like?
So this is a great question because I don't know if the author of this question knows this, but AAC&U invented the term high impact practices long time ago, back before any of us were working at AAC&U. But yeah, the high impact practices. It's a great way to combine some of these ideas because community engaged learning is one of the high impact practices, as is undergraduate research. So these are opportunities to bring the inclusive excellence, student success recommendation and the community engagement recommendation together, building these techniques into pedagogy is an excellent way to build trust and simply create a better learning experience for students.
We also know that high impact practices lead to better student outcomes. They lead to more graduations, they lead to better retention. And again, every student success story is a success story for the sector. And every student story that ends in some kind of failure or dreams unrealized is a detriment to us. So the more we can use high impact practices to support the success of more students, the better our story is that we're trying to tell to the world.
We have a question on how institutions in states that are facing restrictions and cutbacks can navigate preparing students for a diverse workforce and a increasingly globalized world while eliminating or weakening some of the programs that underpin those preparations and those structures.
Gotta unmute. This is a great question. And I mean, it's tough, right? I don't want to sugarcoat this. I don't want to say that it's, you can just do everything the way you did it before. There are institutions where that is not the case. There are institutions where high impact practices, where inclusive excellence are being actively eliminated or restricted based on state laws, based on institutional leadership, and so on. The one thing I will say here is we did highlight in the report, and we have since highlighted it a little further on our Substack, the case of UT Arlington, which is in every way an institution that you would expect would be challenged in these moments. It's part of the UT system, so it faces all of the same restrictions that other UT institutions do. It's a Research One institution, so less likely to be community engaged. They have not only won the Carnegie classification for community engagement 3 years running, or 3 cycles running, all over 10 years, but they have also their president just won the highest award that Campus Compact offers for presidential leadership in community engagement, and they are just filling the books. I mean, you can't even list them all on one page. All of the initiatives that they have done at that school to build community partnerships, to really invest in the community, to really invest in students. And some of them are pretty bold, including in terms of the language they're using, given in the current moment. There's a great piece that the president, Jennifer Cowley, did a couple months ago with Campus Compact, where she explained how she did it. And her explanation was that whenever she hears about a new campus idea, a new opportunity to engage with the public, she begins with yes. She calls it beginning with yes. So it doesn't mean that she's ultimately going to say yes to the idea or that it's feasible. But she wants to find a way to get there. And the answer, the conversation begins with how do we make this happen? And she has been able to accomplish some really great things in some very tough turf. Now, that's not a full solution. That's not something that a faculty member can do on their own if they don't have a supportive president. But it does demonstrate that even in some of the worst, restricted states, worst restricted systems in the country, it is possible to provide meaningful experiences for the community, for students, if the administrative will is there.
In some of the cases where programs were eliminated or weakened, faculty and academic staff were redeployed to other departments. And I think one of the challenges of our living into inclusive excellence is that instead of embedding these messages, these histories, these learnings in other departments, we had to create places where we would focus particularly on ethnic studies or Latino studies or women's studies. And in my silver linings rewriting of this history, wouldn't it be lovely if this really difficult political moment instead embedded women's history into the history of America, instead embedded Latino studies into the broader history of America? And that takes courage for individual faculty members, but it also lives more fully into what inclusive excellence means. It doesn't mean bifurcating these other stories into their own divisions, but instead elevating them into the very heart of the work we do. And I come to that perspective as someone, Scout, you introduced me and said that I had worked for a long time at a women's college and attended a women's college. The reason we needed women's colleges is because women were systematically excluded from other kinds of universities. And while I love my women's college experience, my hope is for a world where women have such a wonderful experience in all types of colleges and universities that they wouldn't be needed in the same kind of way. And maybe thinking about that makes this difficult political moment just a little bit more hopeful for the future.
Yeah, I have a slightly different take on this. And I think it's partially, I'm thinking about, so previously I worked at the State Department and I think about, before we send people overseas, they have to go through training. They have to go through cultural competency, language training. Like this is essential before you send someone to another country. And I'm thinking about we're going to send students out into the workforce and they not have the cultural competency that they need in order to be successful. I really think that the answer to this is that students will have to be the voice, right? Students will have to come back to the college campuses and say, "Hey, you didn't prepare me for this," right? I was unable to get the cultural the skills that I needed in order to be successful in the workforce because I didn't know how to work with people from all of these different spaces. I didn't know how to have difficult conversations. I didn't know how to do some of this stuff, and so I suspect that students will be able to be the guides on some of this and come back. I always think about when students go off and do an internship, you always ask them kind of what was your experience? What did you learn? What could we have done better to prepare you for your internship? And so I would be interested in see if like 2 or 3 years down the road, if we have like some student surveys on their experiences post college, their experiences and internships, and what skill sets they did not have, right, beyond AI, what skill sets they did not have in terms of cultural competency in order to be successful, and whether or not that will help change that will like be a full circle moment where it's like, oh, we do need to embed some of this stuff again into higher ed. So I don't know if that will happen, but I do think that part of this and part of the work that we've been thinking about is how do we empower students? How do we empower student voice? And so I really think that we have to think about how do we support students in sharing what they're not receiving because of some of these restrictions.
Yeah, and I'll add in there as well, thinking about opportunities and learning lessons from other programs. I'm thinking particularly of the Gilman Scholarship, which provides funding to Pell eligible students to support their study abroad. This is a program that has enjoyed strong bipartisan support for decades now. So thinking about what that program has, the lessons that we can take away and how it might impact and how we can apply those to other programs that are enjoying less bipartisan support, even as the work that they're doing is just as important. I will I will encourage folks to continue to put their questions into the chat. I'd also like to ask my colleagues what their thoughts are on building public trust. We've talked about some of the political wins that institutions are facing. I'd also like to think about we're living in an age of AI where things are rapidly changing all the time, and it's estimated that up to 70% of the skills that are currently required by jobs won't be needed by 2030, which is a ridiculously short timeline. What impact do you think that that has on public trust in this particular moment of rapid technological innovation?
Well, it depends on how well we adapt. And of course, it's probably not possible to adapt quickly enough for the AI revolution, which essentially demands overnight change in everything we do in higher education. But I do think there are promising signs that higher education is taking this seriously, that there is adaptation going on a time scale that is unusual for higher ed, even if it's slower than what the moment requires. AAC&U has an excellent program on AI literacy that is, Leadership Institute for Campuses that is offered by our colleague Eddie Watson. And they run these leadership institutes. They get 100 campuses at a time that want to participate in this. Everyone is hungry for this information. They are trying to integrate it into their pedagogy. They may not be moving fast enough, but I think they are moving quickly. And my hope is that the public will increasingly see that as students go off to college and pick up AI literacy skills so that they can be more effective professionals using AI. In some ways, I actually see this as an exception that proves the rule that higher education really, can move faster when it really needs to. Another example of this is the quick switch to virtual classes in 2020. Higher ed can move when it absolutely has to because circumstances force it to. Our task is to be able to get higher ed to move this fast when it's something just a little less dire than a global pandemic or the revolutionizing of the workforce and the workplace by AI.
To give another exception that proves the rule, Jeremy, I think the choice is not between AI or people. It's between people who use AI and people who don't use AI. And in some ways, the rapid technological change is just emphasizing for me the importance of human skills and the very liberal education skills that AAC&U has been promoting for decades will continue to be important as humans use AI and make ethical choices and critical thinking about when AI is right, when it's appropriate, and when AI is not helpful in forwarding the conversation. So I do still think that there's room for us to forward some of those same essential learning skills and just deploying them alongside AI to create a workforce that's ready for tomorrow.
And I would just add that I think AI adoption is an opportunity to think about community engagement and to think about what are community perceptions and thoughts around AI and what is the role a university or a college plays in either increasing the fears that community members may have or alleviating those fears that community members may have. And so I think there could be some really interesting, I would really like to see some conversations between kind of universities, businesses, and local community members around AI adoption and what this means for the workforce, what this means for community members, what this means for student learning. I think those are going to be hard conversations, but they need to happen as universities start thinking about what does the next 5 to 10 years look like with the adoption of AI and the impact of it and the cost and all of these things. They're not siloed problems. They're not issues that are just going to stay on campus. They are issues that are going to impact everyone around them as well. And so I do see that as an opportunity for university leaders to be thoughtful in how they engage communities around these conversations.
In thinking about the report and the recommendations that we make, obviously not every institution is facing the same pressures. A large public flagship and a small private college are in fundamentally different positions. How can the report's recommendations be adapted for institutions with very different resources and risk exposure?
It's a good question. I mean, I think that a lot of that is hard to answer in this kind of question because it is something, frankly, that we will learn as we work more closely with campuses to meet their specific needs and to adapt this to the specific concerns and challenges that they face. We assume that there is a significant difference between what is easy and what is hard for a community college and for an elite research university. But I think they're going to have to tell us what the differences are at their level, and it may vary even within a subsector. It may have some research universities that are able to do something very easily, and others that for which it's much more difficult. They may face different challenges. That's one of the actually fascinating things about American higher education is how fragmented and diverse it is. It's more fragmented and diverse than higher education in any other country in the world. Typically, higher education is sort of governed by the government, the federal government, and for us, it's a lot of it's governed by states, a lot of it is governed by independent accreditation bureaus. The federal government has some role, but not usually a controlling one. And so every school is different, every circumstance is different. It's a diverse country, so I think it's a bit of a cop out, but my answer is it really depends on the particular campus. I don't know if my colleagues have something more specific to say.
Well, you started, Jeremy, by talking about the origins of this project, which were in the call for constructive engagement. And I think what was so powerful about that call is that it was a unified statement from over 660 higher education leaders representing the diversity of higher education. And what AAC&U was able to do is create the container language that would garner support from all of those different types of institutions. Not everybody signed it, not everybody had to, but I think many institutions felt some cover in joining hundreds of others in making this statement about what was valuable to them. And my hope is that the tools that we provide in the report, because they are shared, will also provide similar cover. So one of the recommendations in the report is to tell a clearer story. We provide some tools from communications partners to do that effectively. And if many different institutions are using those same tools to deliver the same message, I hope it provides them some overarching cover to maybe be a little braver, a little more courageous in their particular environment. Or if they're unable to be courageous, brave, to say certain things in their geographic and political environment, that other individuals can step up and speak for and with them.
Yeah. We have a comment here as well that says AAWU Florida and the League of Women Voters Florida are eager to help. What can we do? We did a major study on the effects of Florida's legislation since 2022, but we could work on some positive messages.
I think the request for positive messages here is really important. We need to not only defend higher education against these attacks, but also to continue explaining the value in positive and appealing terms. And we've provided the link to our report a couple of times, and I would encourage this questioner to look at the communication tools that we've provided there, because they really do connect higher education with values that are universally popular, things like freedom and fairness and strength. And those are valuable not just for higher education, but for adjacent affiliates who are looking to communicate on behalf of the sector.
I would add, I am very interested in the ability of the League of Women Voters in particular to build bridges between campus leaders and the general public. I think if you can get a local college or university president or provost to come and just do a sort of ask me anything Q&A with the general public, that's really going to be beneficial because one of the things we did find in our research is that the more the public can see and feel and almost taste what a campus is doing, that it's run by humans who are sympathetic, who have interesting ideas, who are trying to benefit the community, the more support they're going to provide. So just an opportunity to break down that gap. We've talked a little bit about how higher ed needs to do that on our end, but community organizations that want to feature higher ed leaders in conversation with the general public can really make a big difference here.
Well, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Please visit Alt Liberal Arts to register for the upcoming webinar, A Conversation with Students in Crisis with Dr. Chamotun on July 30th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. All offerings are available free of charge, and you can also view any past webinars, including this one, at the Alt Liberal Arts YouTube channel. Thank you and have a great rest of your afternoon.